Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are working our way through the book of Judges, and we are pretty much at the halfway point, pretty close to the halfway point. Yeah. We're doing one chapter per day this week, so five chapters, chapters 13 through 17, probably one of, if not the best known stories in the book of Judges.
Yeah. So it's Samson.
Or the whole Bible.
Samson. Yeah, so, but why, right?
Well, he's got long hair. He's the strongest man in the world. I mean, it's just sort of all of the...
So I picture this huge guy, right?
Yeah, mythical...
But he might not have been.
Yeah,
right? He might not have had muscles. Because there's a part where he kind of gets lost in the crowd, right?
Yeah.
And figures some... big muscular guy wouldn't have got lost.
Yeah, it's possible that with the exception of maybe his hair, he looked pretty much like everybody else. It wasn't his strong muscle. It wasn't his muscles that made him strong. It was the Holy Spirit, all sorts of these things.
Yeah, so, and I do think things that we learn and teach in maybe our youth parts aren't necessarily biblical. Or we focus on some wrong things.
If you grow up in Sunday school or if you grow up in church or something, this is obviously one of
big story.
The favorite stories. Kids like to pretend to be Samson and, all these things.
But as you'll find, there's a whole lot of this that you're not going to be telling the kids. and it kind of goes back to what you talked about last week and every week. There's this downward spiral that's happening. So we had some Judges. First couple were great.
Good,
and now we're getting to the end of Judges, and they're less than not so good.
If you took Samson's story, let's put it this way. If you took Samson's story, it's historical narrative. We believe it, we trust it, but if you take it out of the book of Judges and just have it stand on its own, you don't give it any religious connotation, you don't give it the whole historical context, you're going to look at this guy and you're like, this is a jerk, he's a narcissist, he's he's a womanizer, he's whatever. This is not some upstanding Christian or godly or what, but this is what Israel gets.
Yeah, exactly.
For 20 years.
Well, and last week, if you remember, there was a guy by the name of Jeff. I had it before. And Jephthah. Man, I had it. He was an illegitimate son. He had a gang. He, probably did some very bad things, and they asked him to come back and basically lead the nation of Israel, and he did into a war. Here we see kind of the mere opposite, right? So we have this guy by the name of Samson, and before he was even born, angel of the Lord went to his mother and said, "Here's what I want you to do." And gave her not necessarily a list of demands, but it was, you're going to refrain from anything from the grapevine, and among other things. So it was almost as while Samson was growing inside of her, still had a rapport with the Holy Spirit always.
Well, it's one of those things where, so this was under the law of Moses, a person, an individual, could make a vow. They called it a Nazirite vow, and they were not allowed to cut their hair during the time. It was a fixed time. I'm going to take this vow for, X number of days or weeks or whatever. It was a solemn vow, consecrating themselves to God for a specific purpose, for a specific time. They're not going to cut their hair. They're not going to touch dead bodies. They're not going to, they couldn't even go to a funeral or whatever. Could not, eat or drink anything from a grapevine. But that was a choice that somebody made. Here, Samson didn't even have the choice. Because like you said, the angel of the Lord said, from the womb, he is going to be a Nazirite before the Lord. And his whole life has to be that way. And in fact, if he can't eat it, neither can you.
Which is really bizarre, isn't it?
Well, but that also gives us from our perspective looking backward, there's a whole lot of science going on there. There's a lot of biology. There's stuff where, he is attached to her. If she's eating it, he's eating it. And all of these things that we just take for granted today, medically, we find it in the book of Judges.
Well, one of the commentaries that I read talked about it from the point of the Holy Spirit, saying that there's a connection, and the whole idea of the vows is that you wanted to keep that connection strong. And if there's alcohol involved, that can be something that breaks the connection. If there is ceremonial uncleanliness, like with a dead body, you have a break. And in his case, there was never a break, even from conception.
Well, there wasn't supposed supposed to be.
Yeah.
Wasn't
Okay.
supposed
Good
to
point.
be. But there was, from even from conception, there wasn't supposed to be. This was not something he had the choice of doing, which is rare in the Bible, honestly. Right. God very rarely says you must do this and you don't have a choice about it.
Yes.
Very rarely.
So angel of the Lord comes to the mom, gives her all the rules. The mom goes to the dad. The dad's like, what? So angel of the Lord comes back a second time.
He's like, go back to that place and see if he'll show up again.
Yeah, so kind of rare, right?
And it's very cool that God, he was gracious enough to,
exactly.
Dad, Manoah's like, I don't understand this at all. See if we can get the guy back, right?
I have questions.
And so the guy comes back and he's like, what didn't you understand?
It was pretty basic. Yeah, tells him the same thing twice. I actually thought I was in the wrong spot,
He's like, pretty sure I went through all of this stuff with your wife. Did she tell you? And Mrs. Manoah, she's like, I told him. That's what I told him. He's just not listening. How's that sound?
Exactly. There is not a throwaway line, because none of the lines are throwaway, but something that you can skim over really quick. The angel of the Lord, they asked him what his name was, and he said it was something that you can't comprehend.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with that, but that's a cool
really cool
verse.
Yeah. Yep. And we've talked about this concept before. The angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Jesus. Right. This is not just an angel. Not that there are just angels, right? But this is not just an angel. This is God himself, the second person of the Trinity, the eternal Son, who is showing up and doing this. And, his name's not, Michael or Gabriel or whatever. He's like, my name? You don't get my name, right? Yeah. This is
you're not going to get it,
which is cool.
So I think one of the big things too is we need to talk about is the Philistines, right? So they are in the land and they are causing havoc on Israel, and we've seen this happening. Yep. So Samson grows up and he goes into Philistine territory, which seems odd to begin with, and he finds a girl he likes.
Yeah, like. Okay, I thought you were supposed to be protecting us from the Philistines. I thought you were supposed to be, rescuing us from the Philistines or whatever.
Right.
And, he's literally sleeping with the enemy.
Yeah, exactly. So he goes in there, a lion attacks him. He literally rips the lion in half.
Which is very cool.
Yeah, way cool.
That's the fun part of the story.
Comes back to it later. So he goes back to marry her, and there's a bee's nest inside half the carcass, and he scoops out the honey and he's eating the honey. Now it seems to be a big deal, and I would guess the big deal is he is not allowed to scoop that honey out of a dead animal.
Cannot touch a dead body, human or animal, because of his Nazirite.
Right. So is he now ceremonially unclean?
Yeah.
Is he?
Yeah. So now he's supposed to probably make a sacrifice or something to go back and get right with God again.
Right. So he finds this girl he wants to marry. They're going to do the whole marriage ceremony, and he doesn't have any groomsmen on his side. And there's a story you all need to read, and we need to work our way quickly through these parts of stories. Right.
There's so much detail that we want to tell, and it's just
So
but you're going to read it anyway. So
So he has to give him some clothes, and so he goes out and finds clothes, and the way he finds the clothes is rather interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. So in fact, it was so interesting that they gave the bride away to the best man instead of him.
Right. Well, and it was murder. We can at least say it was murder, right? So now
he killed 30 people, took their clothes, and gave
under the Mosaic law. Not only has he violated this vow, this Nazirite vow that God has placed him under, but now he's also added murder. Now you look at that and say, but the Philistines were the enemies. Aren't you supposed to? This was just him running out.
Him doing it. It wasn't a war.
Stuff. This wasn't war. He wasn't leading the nation of Israel. He was just going out killing people for his own agenda, his own benefit. He's sort of like a rogue whatever at this point. And yet, God was still empowering him, still using him. This is one of the toughest doctrinally.
Right.
Not historically. It's like, cool.
Yeah, here's what happened.
Yeah,
exactly.
But doctrinally, principally, why would God function in that way? We have to remember the situation that Israel's in. He's the best they've got.
Right.
Right. And that's pretty bad.
Yeah, we're like on the end of our downward spiral.
Yeah.
So Samson went to get his future wife back. I'm not sure if they were married or not. And he was told that... You left. We gave her to the best man. And he got mad, and he ended up destroying a bunch of grain.
Down their fields.
Yeah. He's saying it the hard way. I was saying it the nice way. They retaliated, killed his father-in-law, let's call him that.
Yeah.
As well as the betrothed in there. And then Samson got mad and killed a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And then went and lived in a cave.
Yeah.
For a while.
So this is just personal revenge. This isn't,
Right.
Israel, him, he's leading Israel. This is just him.
Right. So now we have this leader of Israel in a cave, or in Israel, and the Philistines come. And the Israelites capture Samson and hand him over.
Because the Philistines are afraid of him, but so are the Israelites. And so now it's like the Israelites and the Philistines team up against him.
Right.
And so he kills more people.
Right. Yeah. This time 1,000.
1,000 people.
It's a jawbone of an ass.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is pretty cool. I mean, but hold on a second. A jawbone. That's the bone
Back to dead
of a
animals.
dead animal that he's touching, so that it doesn't get better. I mean, just every page you turn, every verse you read, he's doing something he's not supposed to be doing. And God's still using him, which just blows my mind.
So then he goes to Gaza and everything gets better.
So Gaza is one of 5 major Philistine cities, which means he's going back into enemy territory.
Right.
He doesn't care. He's just coming and going in and out of Philistine territory.
So he sleeps with a prostitute.
Yep.
He gets mad and he rips off the gates of the city.
Yeah.
And seems to take them with him.
Yeah,
And
he's
he
like
leaves.
just carrying them up the hill.
Yeah.
Because they were lying in wait. When he leaves tonight, he's just,
Or in the morning,
lock
right,
him
we're
in.
gonna-
Yeah, he's like, you can't lock me in.
Okay, so then Delilah shows up, and that's
a
where
big
we
part of the
that's where we hear most of the thing. And there's back and forth, and basically to me it's a trust issue, right? Where she knows he has a secret on his strength, and they're playing a game if she can get it out, and she is definitely an enemy spy.
Yeah.
And she is getting money from the Philistines to get the secret, and he even played along and lied to her a couple times.
Well, he's so arrogant. He thinks he can never be caught.
Right.
He thinks that he can.
Well, his life has been perfect up to that point, right?
Yeah. I mean, he keeps towing that line.
Yeah.
I'll do this with my hair. Do this with my hair. Bind me. Whatever. It's like, come on, dude.
So he finally tells her the secret with the hair. She knocks him out. Not quite sure it wasn't physical, right? She puts him to sleep.
Yeah, warm milk or something.
Yeah. Somebody comes in, cuts his hair, gouges out his eyes.
Yeah.
They capture him.
And now he is actually a prisoner instead of a leader.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, at the very end, he has a chance at redemption. He is put into a stadium, or he's brought out into a stadium where he's basically the show.
Yeah.
By this time, his hair is grown back. He does make a prayer to God.
Yeah.
On it, and he is able to wreck the stadium and kill 3,000 Philistines.
Even still, his prayer is, "Please let me get revenge because they poked out my eyes." I mean, it's nothing in here has been about let's glorify God, let's protect Israel. This whole thing has been a story of how bad can he be, how strong can he be, and if you're mean to me, I'm going to get you back. Please, God, before I die, let me get him back one more time.
Yeah.
And God
So what do we do with that?
God used him to take out a lot of Philistines, which is what needed to be done. But man, this is not,
Right.
What's interesting though? Hold on a second.
I was going to say, the next chapter gets better?
Oh, we don't even want to go we have to go to the next chapter, but before we go there, what's interesting is in Hebrews chapter 11, that hall of the great heroes of the faith. Verse 32 says, "And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon." He was not exactly Barak, that guy, that little Weasley guy who wouldn't step up, back in chapters 4 and 5. Samson.
Yeah.
Jephthah. I mean, the whole book of Judges the majority of the book of Judges got summed up along the names of David and Samuel and the prophets. We're like, were you reading the same book?
Right. So are we missing something?
That's so as we're making fun. We're we're reading through this saying this is a horrible time. God inspired the words of Hebrews 11 to say these guys still made it in as heroes of the faith or faithful at some level. They were faithful in the situation.
He did lead Israel for 20 years.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so then we get to chapter 17, which seems to be an odd chapter, seems to be, more information, different information, and then we think we're done with it, but this information does show up again next week.
So the rest of Judges is just, I just say it's just a mess. It's just the rest, these last 5 chapters, 17 this week, and then the rest is just absolutely a disaster of a story here. And this sets it up, and then next week.
So a son steals 1,100 pieces of silver from his mother.
Yeah. It's a lot of silver.
Yeah, they don't tell us how much that is, but it's a fortune.
Yeah.
Right? It's got to be a fortune. So the mom doesn't know it's the son, which is odd. She may not even have been missing it, which is
even odder, right?
Yeah, really odd. So she dedicates these. So he gives it back to her.
He's like, "Oh, Mom, I heard that you placed a curse on whoever stole it. I don't want to be cursed." So there's another whole aspect of
yeah. So she has now pledged this 1,100 to her son, even though she gets it back. And then she uses 200 pieces instead of the 1,100, and she makes a couple idols out of it.
Yep.
And this is, okay, I know she's not a good Christian woman.
Right. But she's not even a good Jewish woman at this
right.
point. I mean, this is the nation of Israel at this point, yeah.
Right. So we have 200 pieces of silver, take to a silversmith, made into a couple different idols. And then she puts them into her son's house. And there's a shrine in the son's house. And then hired another son to be the priest.
One of his sons.
Oh,
so her grandson.
Yeah, grandson.
Yeah, right. One of his sons.
Yeah. There's all kinds of wrong here.
Oh,
right.
I don't even know where to start, right? Yeah.
Right. And as you're reading, it's like, oh, okay.
And verse 6 really sums it up. We're in chapter 17. Verse 6 really sums it up. In those days, Israel had no king, which it means, by the way, that this was written after Israel had a king. Thinking back to, and back in those days, this was the lawless West, type thing.
Right.
Each man did what he considered to be right, or
that's kind of the reoccurring theme in
what was right in his own eye.
So I took that to be a little bit different. I took it to be there was no king, so there was no moral leader of Israel, so everybody was on their own.
Except the priests were supposed to be the moral leaders.
We're not seeing any.
I know.
Well, I'm seeing a grandson that was hired to be a priest.
Right. So where are the priests? Where
one shows up. So at the end of this chapter, a Levite from Bethlehem shows up and came to Micah's house.
Yeah.
And Micah hired him to be a priest for his shrine and his house temple.
Under the law, all priests came from the tribe of Levi, but not every Levite was a priest. So he's called a Levite, which means he wasn't supposed to be a priest, but somebody hired him, so he's like, I get to be a priest now.
And Micah's thoughts were not, God will be with me, but I know I'll be rich.
I know.
Because I have this Levite as my priest.
I've got a priest, so God has to bless me.
Right. So it's somebody bringing in religious symbols, making their own shrine, opening it up, trying to make money off of it. I'm just trying to think of, like, in today's world, what would that be like? And now I have an actual Levite priest.
Well, I know of people who in other religions where if their son grows up to be a son grows up to be a pastor, a son grows up to be a priest or something, that makes the family real special, right? Yeah. We're definitely all in. But yeah, just I can charge you, pay me for a blessing, whatever, and we haven't even gotten to the bad part yet.
No, that's next week.
This sets up the bad part. Is just a mess. So
this continues next week.
Yeah. This is the end of the favorite Sunday school stories of Judges. This is the end of the best part of Judges.
Nobody goes into next week. Yeah.
It just doesn't get any better. But so what's our big takeaway? I mean, if we had to take a takeaway from Samson's life, you could go really negative. You could go positive from the heroes of the faith. Obviously.
Well, chapter
17.
There has to be the heroes of the faith because one, it was included.
Yeah.
In the Bible, and then in the New Testament, it was brought out again that they were faithful. So I would take it even in times where God was silent. the people were going down, there were pockets of people that
Yeah.
that were still faithful to God.
Yeah. Yep. So we would call that maybe a remnant, or we would call that something. It's I think the principle that we can take away is that even in the worst situation, no matter where we find ourselves, we can still be faithful, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know, and it may not look as perfect as we'd like, and it may not look anywhere close to what even it could or should be, but even a little bit of faithfulness. God is always looking for faithfulness, and if we can even start down that path, He can work with that.
Yeah, that's a good place.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, and I think in our history, we're going to see that again, where Christians, in end times,
yeah,
where the people that are now going to be the faithful, just they don't have the time, they don't have the ability, so it'll look completely different than us with all of our commentaries and Bibles and schooling and all that. Happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we don't pray for persecution. We don't want tribulation and trial and everything, but it sure does
We want what's on the
expose
on the end of
character, and it certainly can grow us, right? So be faithful where you're at. Be faithful in whatever little thing that you're at, and let God take care of the rest. Hopefully that's encouraging to you, depending on what you're going through right now. Feel free to pass this along to your friends and family, anyone who you think could use that same encouragement. And we'll see you back here next time. We'll finish up the book of Judges next time.
Bye, everybody.